Thank you very much. Our next speaker is David Harris. David Harris is a lawyer and an expert on national security matters, and he's probably one of Canada's leading experts on terrorism. He's the Director of International and Terrorist Intelligence Program for Insignis Strategic Research. He was a former Chief of Strategic Planning at the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, and he's also served as a Senior Fellow for National Security at the Canadian Coalition for Democracies. Nice to say Maclean's magazine has called him one of Canada's leading experts on terrorism, and you can see in your agenda he's been in a number of American TV shows, from the Today Show to the O'Reilly Factor to CNN Wolf Blitzer Reports, NBC Dateline, and even America's Most Wanted. But you're not one of the most wanted, are you? Well, maybe. Would you please welcome David Harris.
That's a long walk that could only be beaten by something out of Miss America. But there aren't many bald Miss Americas around these days. Thank you very much, Fred, for the kind introduction. And wonderful to have heard Barb in full sail. She's well worth reading as often as you possibly can. This is an amazing get-together, and it's taken a good deal of courage, it seems to me, for the Free Thinking Society to have put it together. I've very much enjoyed and learned a lot from the two films that have been on offer. Of course, our responses to them will vary. Our critiques will have to be adjusted from time to time as new thoughts come to us. But there are a number of themes that, as Barb has indicated, are compelling. First of all, The Case for Israel, a well-known film involving a well-known individual, Dershowitz. I found it useful to see there the summary of what, of course, is well described in the title, The Case for Israel. And I find myself, particularly as a non-Jew and a non-Israeli, more and more amazed by the way in which Israel faces indictment after indictment that's gone on for years, in the face of all evidence of a liberal, pluralist, democratic country that could frankly show any number of other countries in its neighborhood how things should be done in a civilized entity. It is astonishing, and what is more than astonishing but troubling is to see how it is that increasingly in what passes for the international environment, the environment of international institutions, and even, if I may use the term extraordinarily loosely, international law, we see these indictments catching on. We see international institutions, the Human Rights Council. We see initiatives from the Organization of Islamic Conference pressing again and again on Israel for all manner of concessions, which anybody who has paid much attention to developments recognize as merely the prelude to the extinguishing of Israel, of course, as a country, and the elimination of Jews in that environment. I think it's very important that we maintain an awareness of what is going on behind the scenes and what underpins the thinking of the so-called recommendations that you hear from time to time. Now, you'll see the film for yourself. I do have one thought, perhaps a cautionary note, and I hope I will be forgiven for using a term that would seem to emerge from the press book of Hamas. And that term is too many Jews. And the problem is that if you look at the film, and if the film is meant to be a work, among other things, of advocacy, it is full of Jews. If you look at those who have sponsored it, they are Jewish names. And owing to my own interest, this is an obvious point known to all of those involved in mass communication, owing to my interest in intelligence on the one hand, and law on the other, I couldn't help but think of remarks made in a relatively little-known book by a fellow by the name of Ewan Montague, who had been involved in British intelligence deception operations during the Second World War, but was also a barrister, a lawyer. And he made the point, in connection with intelligence deception operations, but also in terms of general advocacy. He said, to be any good, an advocate has got to present things as will take the most advantage of the tastes of the hearer, not as will make oneself feel good. And I would suggest that we are very far beyond the time when we should be preaching only to the choir and converted. We can see demographics shifting dramatically, in part, of course, as a result of massive immigration movements that have been, of course, worked to the profit of successive politicians who seem to regard our immigration undertaking as essentially a vote importing mechanism. And so 250,000 people come into the country each year, and I don't think anybody would very seriously suggest that they could be fully and effectively screened in the way that's called for in this day and age. This is part of the challenge we face. It would be a suggestion for those who might be involved in future in Israel advocacy, as I might suggest the term might be. As for the film The Monster Among Us, this is a dismaying and deeply troubling film for everybody with any kind of heart or soul or sense of the future. And there you will see the evidence of what trends can bring. In some respects, what small L liberalism, when accompanied by a failure of critical thought and analysis, can bring. I think of Mark Stein's famous expression, I can only hope to paraphrase it at the moment, when he said that on the liberal landscape, the belief is that we have no enemies, but only people whom we have not yet accommodated. The difficulty is, of course, that contrary to what is, when you boil it down, an outrageous conceit, the conceit that says that people, no matter what their upbringing, no matter what jurisdiction they're from, no matter to what extent they would apostatize anybody associated with liberal pluralist thought, the belief has it that the instant they would set foot in this country, they will become indeed liberal pluralists, like the rest of us. And our conceit is an amazing thing, because it occurs despite a good deal of evidence to the contrary. And now, in the form, of course, of homegrown terrorism, we're learning not only about the risks of that kind of overly generous and innocent thinking, but we're also discovering the concept of self-radicalization through the internet and other sources. In a way, that is one of the things that I would suggest the second film warns us about. And I think that we ignore its message only at our peril. Thank you very much to the Free Thinking Film Society for the invitation. Thank you.